everybody, and a pleasure to just hear everybody's reflections. A lot of what I'm going to say does resonate with the previous colleagues as well. We're in London. As far as lockdown, essentially, for many of us, we have transitioned to virtual schools, similar to what colleagues have shared across the group. When we think about special educational needs, I want to pull that out beyond what could be cognitive delay, mental health needs, complex medical, sensory, hearing, visual impairments, and think more broadly about additional needs because of the reality of what the pandemic will do for the education sector. And when we think about these cohorts of pupils, when we take a step back and think actually as far as crisis response, it's really remarkable to see the level of infrastructure that has gone into place, whether one's a rural school, urban, the reality that school leaders and teachers together have worked with their communities to develop a virtual school that's going to continue education. I do hold on to the remarkable sort of developments that have taken place there. I think what we need to do is recognize that there is currently quite a prevalence on the digital sort of infrastructure that's sitting around the construct of how this virtual school will feature. And what we want to do is make sure we're considering the priorities for pupils with additional needs as that is getting developed, maturing, and sort of best practice models are shaping what schools are doing currently. When we think about the special needs population and more broadly, any pupil with additional needs, teachers are very much balancing a lot of metacognition across the sort of holistic priorities for pupils. So we have got a number of children that and cohorts where working memory, task switching, everything that has to link to the neuroscience of learning with executive function, is equivalent in priority alongside sense of self, developing their self-confidence, balancing quite sort of sensitive and fragile mental health priorities in order to really develop the holistic needs of the child or young person alongside their engagement with content and subject-specific curriculum. Teachers are highly skilled at promoting that engagement. And I'm very mindful of the impact that virtual schools have on that process of pedagogical interaction between the teacher, the group of pupils, and how highly skilled teachers are at being able to facilitate learning and mobilize the holistic development for pupils. The knowledge of that holistic picture for their class is very much anchored on relationships. And it's so inspiring on a daily basis to hear the knowledge that teachers have of their children, their students, and some of the motivators that can be quite subtle to move from the delivery of a lesson to actually the engagement in the process of learning and facilitating the independence for the child. For pupils with additional needs, this is significant and quite fundamental to also developing that sense of self and their personal confidence in who they are and who they can be, because often this population can be marked by a number of deficits with age equivalency. Mobilizing teachers to be able to balance the academic scaffolds that are currently the focus point, whether that's digital or the way that physical learning is going to get out to communities and to families during lockdown, is as relevant as us considering the next priority, which is going to be around those emotional scaffolds. How are we mobilizing teachers to be able to balance the two? Because this is really challenging when the class is not directly in front of you, when that key relationship is going to be quite significant and pivotal to be able to support the trust and the confidence a child has during times of significant uncertainty. The reality is that the holistic priorities for the wider population beyond the group with additional needs is going to now become an equivalent priority. And it is going to be quite significant for us to take on as educators, because this is the challenge that we're facing. Pupils with additional needs and special educational needs would have had that at the heart of a lot of short and medium term planning to promote their engagement. But we're going to recognize that the wider population of children and young people are essentially growing up within a pandemic atmosphere and climate. And so their emotional well-being is going to be crucially at the core of what a lot of the agility with curriculum design is. It has resonated with previous speakers and colleagues. Formative assessment sits at the heart of this, with pupils with special educational needs and pupils that have additional mental health priorities as well. The pivotal part of that is about that relationship, knowledge, and understanding of the child or the young person and being able to shape it. So for me, I want to ensure that what can be sometimes the very invisible population is actually a group that may be shaping what we're doing more broadly for cohorts across the entire school and the entire virtual school sort of consideration, whatever our context is. My school, for example, majority of pupils are marginalized in their local community because of their special educational needs. Significant number live below the poverty belt. We've had to take various measures to ensure that they can access the digital element of what a virtual school could be. But actually, when we asked our teachers what they felt was necessary to promote quite meaningful learning versus a day-to-day management of a crisis, it was about physical resources and the way that we were going to support families to have what was needed to have a more authentic learning experience versus one that was going to be managing the day-to-day. So I would share 3 priorities that I think we can really hold on to as we're trying to mobilize teachers and educators in this new normal. The first is around formative assessment, which we've spoken about, and it's sharing some of the lessons we've learned from the more complex end of the sector. What we find quite powerful is the opportunity that sits there to actually have families as part of the co-construction with formative assessment. So it's not about the teacher having to unpack and decipher what that learning experience was through potentially technology, or it might be through telephones, depending on the sort of infrastructure in your locality, but actually the potential role in us being able to co-construct this with family members so that we're providing an anchor in the home environment that almost allows the child to recognize the role of their teacher within their home. And for the family to be able to, as they're experts of their child, shape that picture on progress and development. What we've found certainly is very valuable for us is for anybody who does have the digital infrastructure available is a sort of platform called Evidence for Learning. If you just Google Evidence for Learning, we find it very user-friendly, very versatile, and one that is already in the system, shaped by teachers through a very innovative technology organization. The second part for me is the agility of the curriculum. So whilst we are trying to continue and complete schemes of work, programs of study, the reality that actually at the moment we need to consider that bolted on sort of additional component around the curriculum, which has to do with COVID itself. Our pupils' understanding of what this new normal is, their sense of how they fit into this, their sense of the vulnerability they're watching with their families and their communities is the most significant learning opportunity at the moment. And their sense of self and who they are within their peer group, but also their sort of family unit, whilst we're all siloed and separated, is a significant priority. And for pupils with special educational needs and additional needs, even more so, because understanding that without being able to generalize and maximize that through a sort of shared context and knowledge based whilst being in lockdown scenarios can be quite challenging. And the anxiety level and the stress that can rise for families through that is significant as well. I do think that what we should bear in mind is the power of mobilizing teachers to co-construct what that curriculum is, and that agility in the curriculum being shaped by pupils themselves, because they've got the questions they want answered. We actually probably have similar questions ourselves, and so it's quite a unique sort of scenario for us to consider what this could be. Alongside this, for me, quite fundamentally, is teacher well-being. So the most powerful pedagogy, the most dynamic and extraordinary pedagogical approaches come through such strong knowledge and understanding of a teacher's understanding of their pupils. And those relationships and the strength of those relationships is really the beauty of the profession and something that we see celebrated regularly. At this time, the pressure that teachers are carrying in trying to understand what challenges their pupils face, it's going to vary child to child. Pupils with additional needs, the metacognition wrapped around supporting them to be able to interact with processing, what is happening, how does that make you feel, do you feel secure, your confidence levels, all the progress that may have taken place in the school year, suddenly feeling some of the setbacks to that are going to really motivate teachers to want to go that extra step. The gravity of what the profession has carried is, I think, immeasurable. And our recognition that our workforce is currently being resilient for themselves, for their own families, alongside the resilience for their pupils and their peers and colleagues, is something that we don't want to underestimate. And the potential for us to make sure that the sector leaders and those at the heart of government recognize how much this profession is the hub for many families, population or not. For pupils with additional needs, it'll be even more significant. And if any of those teachers were unwell, they would still be carrying that pressure because they know the fundamental role they play for the balance of a family. So for me, some of the answers sit in conduits across networks like this network itself. Teachers are very much owning their profession. They're shaping what the profession is and should be. And technology is quite powerful for mobilizing that as well. Sharing best practice, sharing quick solutions, sharing ideas. We shouldn't underestimate that we don't need a lot of policymakers to problem solve that. Those solutions are already at the hands of very highly skilled professionals. And the autonomy that Yasso sort of mentioned at the start as the first speaker, and really giving that platform for that consideration is, I think, quite pivotal to supporting the well-being priority that sits there as well. As far as pupils with additional needs, there's a lot of solutions that sit in that sector that could now be quite valuable for the majority across the workforce.